Welcome in. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of resident embassies.
Ah, embassies.
They're those international outposts we hear about constantly, but
Right.
do we really understand what goes on behind those closed doors?
Yeah.
Luckily, we have historian G.R. Berridge to guide us.
Okay.
His new book, New W Outposts of Diplomacy, reveals the history of embassies is far more
No.
than just boring treaties and diplomatic dinners.
Really? More than that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's start unpacking this.
Liz.
Where do we even begin with embassies?
Well, the whole idea of a resident embassy, having someone permanently stationed in a foreign country,
Right.
that took centuries to evolve.
Centuries.
It's true. Before we had these grand embassies, we have to rewind all the way back to ancient Greece.
Okay.
They had these folks called proxenoi.
Proxenoi.
Now, these weren't your typical diplomats.
Okay.
Imagine a well-connected citizen representing a foreign city.
Wait, so they were foreigners representing a city they weren't even from?
Exactly. It's a bit of a head scratcher. They were vital, though.
Wow.
Building bridges between cultures, navigating the world of diplomacy without the luxury of permanent reps.
I see. So a much more intertwined role than we might think today.
Absolutely.
The original diplomatic multitaskers?
You could say that.
You've got me thinking, what were the perks of the job back then? Free amphoras of olive oil?
Who knows?
All right, so we've got ancient Greece. What's next in our embassy timeline?
Let's fast forward to 15th century Italy. Picture bustling city-states like Milan and Venice.
Oh,
Intrigue.
Places practically fueled by it. This is where those first true resident embassies popped up.
Italy, the birthplace of pizza, opera, and resident embassies.
That's right.
There's a theme here. But seriously, what made that period so important for having a 247 diplomat?
Think of it like a high-stakes chess game. Alliances were constantly shifting. You needed someone there,
I see.
gathering intel, forging alliances, all at a moment's notice.
Makes sense. So who were these early ambassadors? Were we talking nobles gliding through grand halls?
Well, it was a mixed bag, really. Some were from influential families, sure.
Okay.
But many were actually skilled lawyers, clergymen, sharp as a tack bureaucrats,
Interesting.
people who knew the political game inside and out. And Latin. Fluent in Latin.
Of course. The language of diplomacy.
Absolutely.
This is still an era of some, shall we say, bold power moves.
Oh, for sure.
What was really happening in those early embassies?
Let's just say espionage wasn't just common, it was practically part of the job description.
Oh, I bet. Every embassy had its share of secrets.
More than a few.
What's the most scandalous thing you've uncovered about those early ambassadors?
One story that always gets me is about these two English ambassadors in Italy, Christopher Bainbridge and Sylvester Gigli.
Okay.
Gigli's mission: undermine Bainbridge.
No way. Talk about awkward carriage rides.
Things escalated, and when Bainbridge died suddenly, well, rumors of poisoning started swirling.
That's high-stakes diplomacy. I bet those Renaissance walls could tell some stories.
I'd love to hear them.
Me too. But secrets and intrigue aside, these early ambassadors, they had quite the to-do list, didn't they?
It's true, it wasn't all cloak and dagger.
Yeah.
They had to report on everything, local news, military happenings, all while drumming up trade, and even, believe it or not, procuring exotic gifts for their rulers.
Talk about a demanding boss.
Right.
Imagine having to impress a king who already has everything.
Exactly.
With responsibilities piling up like that, running an embassy must have been a real handful.
Oh, absolutely. It's like
Right.
these embassies start becoming these mini courts. You've got secretaries, you've got servants, and eventually even the ambassadors' families in the mix. Bigger residences, more staff.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for some serious power dynamics.
I bet. Whose carriage was grander, whose silverware sparkled brighter.
Exactly.
The rivalries.
Before we get lost in the world of diplomatic dinner parties, let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Embassies, they needed a place to be, right? Of course, real estate is always a hot topic.
Did they rent? Buy? What was the deal?
Renting was the go-to for a long time. Even finding a good property, that was a task.
I bet.
You needed space for your staff, families, and let's not forget those fancy diplomatic shindigs.
It sounds like they needed a spreadsheet just to keep track of it all.
Pretty much. It wasn't just about finding a place that could fit everyone,
Right.
though it had to make a statement,
Okay.
project that image of power and prestige. You know?
Oh, absolutely. Location, 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 as they say.
Exactly. Close to the political heart of the city, but hopefully not too hard on the budget either.
So many factors. Did they ever think about just buying the properties outright?
Earning, huh? That was a big step, a real commitment.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine if things went south with the host country, you'd be stuck with this expensive reminder of a failed relationship.
A constant reminder. Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Can't be having sour grapes and a hefty mortgage.
Exactly. There were exceptions, of course.
Oh.
Constantinople, late 16th century, you see the French building their own embassy.
Oh, wow.
But those were big decisions, not taken lightly.
Fascinating how real estate gets tangled up in all of this.
It's true.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk communication.
Oh, yeah.
No emails, no phones, not even a reliable postal service.
Right, well.
How on earth did they manage?
Enter the couriers.
The couriers?
Those unsung heroes of diplomacy.
Okay.
Carrying sensitive messages across, well, sometimes pretty dangerous territory.
It's like something out of an adventure novel. Racing against time, vital information.
Exactly.
Were there ever any double agents, betrayals, that kind of thing?
Oh, you better believe it. Trust was paramount.
I bet.
These couriers, meticulously vetted, often chosen from within the ambassador's own household.
Wow, had to keep in the inner circle.
Absolutely, the stakes were too high, otherwise.
Really highlights how crucial those personal connections were back then.
Absolutely.
We've talked a lot about ambassadors.
Right.
But what about their families?
The ambassador's entourage.
Right. Did they play a role in this whole diplomatic world?
The role of family, especially the wives, it really evolved over time.
Interesting.
At first, it was unusual for wives to be part of these postings.
Really?
Yeah, but as the ambassador's role shifted,
Okay.
became more about building those personal relationships, representing their culture,
Right.
having a spouse, well, it became a real asset.
So from just signing treaties to more like, social diplomacy?
Exactly. A well-connected wife could navigate those social circles, pick up on gossip,
Oh, I bet.
maybe even sway some decisions with a well-placed conversation.
The original power couples.
That's right.
I imagine, though, not every spouse was thrilled about packing up and moving to a foreign country.
Well, it was a different time, different expectations.
True.
And for those ambassadors who, let's say, their personal lives weren't so traditional,
Okay.
mistresses weren't unheard of.
Oh, I'm sure those situations caused quite the stir back home.
You can imagine.
The gossip. It makes you wonder how they balanced it all, the personal, the professional.
Right. It was a demanding role, and it just kept evolving.
It did. And then, bam, the 19th century rolls in, and with it, the telegraph.
Game changer.
Right. Messages that used to take weeks, now instantaneous.
Just like that.
What did that do to the whole embassy scene?
It sent a shockwave through the diplomatic world, that's for sure.
I bet. Suddenly you've got this technology that can transmit information across continents.
Exactly. I mean, it made people wonder, right?
Yeah.
Are embassies even necessary anymore?
I can see why they'd think that. Why send a diplomat when you can just send a telegram?
Exactly. But here's the thing.
Oh.
The telegraph, it revolutionized communication, sure.
Right.
But it didn't replace the need for someone on the ground, someone who could build those relationships.
That's true. You can't really build trust over a telegraph wire.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about smooth talk either.
Okay.
Think about it. A telegram can tell you what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But a diplomat, they can tell you why it matters, what it really means.
A human element, those unspoken things.
Precisely. And this need for a real live person, it became even more important as Western diplomacy.
Yeah.
It started expanding into new territories.
Right, reaching new corners of the world.
Exactly. Think about the Far East, 19th century, embassies in places like Japan and China.
Okay.
They were walking into a whole different ballgame. Cultural misunderstandings.
Right.
Suspicion from the locals.
Yeah, a lot more tension than your average European court, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The British legation in Japan, they described it as both beautiful and vulnerable.
Interesting combination. Beautiful but vulnerable. What did they mean by that?
It was a potential target. They were basically sitting ducks.
Wow. So how did they adapt?
Security became paramount. We start to see the rise of, well, we might call them fortress embassies today.
Fortress embassies?
Yeah, walled compounds, guards, the whole 9 yards. They were designed to protect diplomats from, well, pretty much everything.
From garden parties to full-blown attacks.
You got it. And it wasn't just Japan.
Okay.
After the Boxer Uprising in China, 1900, the legation quarter in Peking,
Right.
heavily fortified, diplomats, they had to be ready for anything. Political unrest, natural disasters.
It's a whole different side of diplomacy, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Not just about fancy dinners and treaty signings anymore.
Not at all. It makes you wonder, with 2 world wars and then the Cold War,
Oh yeah, the 20th century was a wild ride.
how did embassies even function in those times?
Talk about a trial by fire. They went from managing expulsions and internments during wartime to navigating the world of espionage during the Cold War.
Spies and secrets. It's like something out of a movie.
Tell me about it. Take Franz von Papen, for example.
Right.
German military attaché in Washington, D.C. during World War I.
Yeah.
Got caught up in sabotage attempts, disinformation campaigns, the works.
Talk about a tangled web.
It shows you just how complex the role of an embassy had become.
Absolutely. More than just representing your country. It was high stakes all the time.
Exactly. And then you have this other layer emerging, right? The rise of global organizations, the League of Nations, the United Nations.
Right. A more interconnected world.
You'd think with these big players, embassies might become less important.
Yeah, I could see that.
But it didn't really work out that way.
Really?
Nope. See, while the world stage was shifting, embassies, they were still vital.
Okay.
They were the ones laying the groundwork for those big international conferences.
I see.
Lobbying for their countries behind the scenes, even acting as hosts.
So still holding it down, just on a different playing field.
Exactly. And that brings us to today.
The digital age, everything's instantaneous.
Right. Emails, video calls, you name it. Makes you wonder, do we even need physical embassies anymore?
It's a good question with all the technology we have.
Right. But here's the thing, and I think this is key.
Okay.
No matter how advanced technology gets, you can't replace that face-to-face interaction.
That's true. Building trust, understanding those cultural cues.
Exactly. You need that human connection. That's why we see embassies evolving, bringing in these specialized attachés.
Right. Experts in military affairs, economics, all sorts of things.
They bring that focused expertise to the table, bridging the gap between, well, pretty much everything.
It seems like the role of an embassy has always been about adaptation.
100%. It's
Yeah.
about finding that sweet spot between tradition and innovation.
From ancient Greece to the digital age, what a journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, the world of diplomacy, it's complex,
Absolutely.
it's challenging,
Yeah.
but at its core, it's about people.
People and the connections we build.
Exactly. It's about striving for a more interconnected, a more peaceful world.
And that's something worth striving for.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up.
Sounds good to me.
Join us next time as we continue to delve into the fascinating world of history, one deep dive at a time.
Until then.